Happy Monday, everybody. This is Lizzie Jones in for Paper Tray Inks Make It Monday this week. And this week we're going to be doing something I like to call repeating the greeting. So we're stamping our primary sentiment multiple times. Maybe one is in a different color just to make it pop. But the multiples really give the sentiment a little more weight and reinforce your message. So let's get started. I've got a classic craft card base here. It's 5.5 by 8.5. I scored it and folded it in half. I'm adhering it down with a little washi tape temporarily just to make sure it stays closed while I do this first step. This isn't really a technique so much. It's just a splattering, sort of a background enhancement, if you will. I'm just using this Copic Opaque White pigment. I'm watering it down a little bit so it's splatterable. You could use watercolor, you could use acrylic paint, or you could even use re-inker to get a similar effect. The more water you add, the more speckles and splatters you're going to get. So for the focal point, I'm using two of the pierced feature frames. I'm using the inside of the large and the frame of the medium. And you can see they layer here so that you can't see the inside from the large behind the medium. So I'm tracing the sort of outline of the opening just so I can kind of see what area I'm working with. And I'm going to be using this Corner Adorner February die to dress up the corner there, so I kind of wanted to see, once it's all put together, how much space I'm going to have. I'm just using a powder tool here because I know I'm going to be heat embossing my sentiment. I like having the die cut placed just so I can see how everything lines up. I also like starting with, if I'm doing this technique and I am going to do one of the sentiments in a pop-out color to make it kind of the feature, I like to do it first. That way I make sure that it's in the position that I want it to be for the final overall design. If I wait and do that one last, almost inevitably I end up having it in the wrong place. So I'm just going to heat emboss this with white powder and I'll be right back. So heat embossing sometimes warps your paper a little bit, so I'm using washi tape here to keep it nice and flat. Since I'm doing a little bit more precision stamping, normally it wouldn't really bother me, but since I'm trying to line things up fairly closely, I want to make sure that I have a nice even surface to work with. I'm using the Sentiment Staples Thinking of You set for this, and I'm using Aqua Mist ink to give sort of a watermark tone-on-tone feel. You could also use watermark ink for this, but I just chose to go with the matching ink. I like using a grid line block for sentiments and things. If you want to use a stamp platform, that would work really well also. The idea here really is just to make sure you're as precise as possible and things are lined up as neatly and tightly as you can. It just makes it look a lot cleaner, and you know, having the grid line blocks and even stamping on a grid surface can really help make sure that those lines are nice and clean and tight and where you want them, that everything is straight and even. So I'm just going to do a couple of extra lines here. I'm making sure that my sentiment is going from edge to edge in that opening in the frame. So when you look at it, it will say Thinking of You all the way from the top to the bottom. So next here I am stamping the companion sentiment in Tropical Teal on the banner from Tag Sale number 10. I love this banner. It's a great size for these smaller companion sentiments. And I'm just setting it off to the side here because I'm going to tuck it under the frame. So I've got a little bit of adhesive there on the end where I know that the frame is going to overlap. And I'm just placing the sentiment first, the banner that is first, and then pressing the frame down over top of it to make sure that it ends up exactly where I want it. And once it's in place, I can really press down and make sure it's not going to go anywhere. So next here, I'm going to add foam tape to the back of the frame. I love foam tape. Obviously, I use it all the time, and I really think it gives kind of a nice shadow boxy feel once you layer the frame over the background piece there. I'm putting foam tape on pretty much every possible surface just because I think once this gets mailed, I want to make sure that that frame holds up nicely, and if there are gaps in the foam tape, it's really going to sort of show once the card gets physically mailed. So I like to make sure it's nice and sturdy. Okay, once I've got it where I know I want it, I go ahead and press everything down nice and tight, and we're going to go ahead and add this whole thing to the card base. So I'm just going to grab my handy dandy ATG gun. I use the 1/2 inch, the 1/4 inch would work great too. Mine's been around the block, so it's a little worse for wear, but it still works great. And we're going to adhere that right onto that front of that splattered card base. Okay, so now it's time to stamp the Corner Adorner images. This is the Corner Adorner February, and I'm stamping the greenery in Green Parakeet. And I'm going to come back in here with the buds, and those I'm going to do in Harvest Gold. So I've got the doubles here on the one side, and there those go. And then I've got the single bud here on the other side, again in the Harvest Gold. And there's that piece. So that's where I'm going to place it. Next, I'm doing the primary flower in Pale Peony. And I decided I wanted a little bit of shading. So I did some freehand blending. Now this is a lot easier in like a stamp platform, but rather than pull out the stamp platform, I just decided to go for it. And it worked out just fine. So if you don't have a stamp platform, don't let that stop you from blending. You really just need a little bit of a steady hand, and you can still make it work. If you'd rather not deal with the precision that includes re-stamping the image, you can always use the rock and roll technique, like I'm doing here with the center of the flower. You ink in the lighter color, roll in the darker color. It's one step and easy. Now, I had intended to add these little flowers, also from the Corner Adorner February, before I put my frame together, but I forgot. So don't be like me. If you want to do another step, don't forget it. Add it in there before you get everything assembled. It's much easier. At any rate, a little creative maneuvering, and I was able to add these flowers with Winter Wisteria ink, and no worse for wear. Everything worked out just fine. So I'm just going to add these little guys in here, a couple of the clusters and a few of the single ones. So I'm going to add that flower corner on with some foam tape to give a little bit of dimension. I like that the foam tape helps set it apart from the frame, or the background in any case, just so it has a little bit of texture of its own. And I'm going to add the bloom here with a little bit of additional foam tape just to make it stand out a little bit. So there you have our finished card using the repeating the grading technique. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's Paper Tray Ink Make It Monday. I hope you'll try this quick and easy technique and link up your project over on the Paper Tray Ink blog for your chance to win a $25 gift certificate. This has been Lizzie Jones, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's Paper Tray Ink Make It Monday. Have a great week, everybody. Hey. No.